Hello and welcome to the Fireside Chronicles, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Settle in, dear reader, for a tale of intrigue, deduction, and the shadowed corners of Victorian London, narrated by Dr. John H. Watson. Chapter 1. A Distressed Visitor. In the autumn of 1889, the fog that so often cloaked London had settled over the city with a peculiar density, as though the very air conspired to conceal secrets. I sat in the familiar sitting room of 221B Baker Street, my pen scratching notes on a recent lecture concerning advancements in toxicology, a subject that had lately piqued my interest. The fire in the grate cast a warm, flickering glow across the room, illuminating the cluttered shelves, the chemical apparatus in one corner, and the violin resting carelessly atop a pile of unanswered correspondence. My friend and companion, Sherlock Holmes, reclined in his armchair, his long legs stretched toward the hearth, his eyes half closed as he drew languidly on his pipe. A thin wisp of shag tobacco smoke curled upward, mingling with the faint scent of coal dust and the damp chill seeping through the window panes. The clatter of hansom cabs and the cries of street vendors were muffled by the fog, lending an almost dreamlike quality to the evening. I had grown accustomed to these quiet moments when Holmes's restless mind seemed for a time at repose. Yet I knew from experience that such tranquility was often the prelude to some extraordinary event. As if in answer to my unspoken thought, a sharp rap echoed from the street door below, followed by the brisk tread of Mrs. Hudson ascending the stairs. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," our landlady announced, her tone tinged with the mild exasperation she reserved for unexpected visitors. "There's a young lady to see you. She's in quite a state, if I may say so." Holmes's eyes snapped open, the languor vanishing as swiftly as a curtain drawn back. "Show her in, Mrs. Hudson," he said, setting his pipe on the table with a deliberate motion. "And pray do not linger to eavesdrop." Mrs. Hudson huffed but retreated, and moments later a young woman entered, her figure swathed in a dark cloak, her face obscured by a black veil that shimmered faintly in the gaslight. Her gloved hands clutched a small crystal vial, its amber contents catching the light like a trapped ember. She stood hesitating at the threshold, her posture radiating distress. "Pray, be seated, mademoiselle," Holmes said, rising with a courtesy that belied his keen scrutiny. He gestured to the chair opposite his own, its cushions worn from countless clients. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. What calamity brings you to Baker Street on such a fog-bound evening?" The woman sank into the chair, her movements unsteady as though the weight of her troubles threatened to overwhelm her. With trembling fingers, she lifted her veil, revealing a pale, delicate face, older than 25, with wide, frightened eyes and lips pressed into a thin line. "I am Mademoiselle Claire Dubois," she said, her voice low and accented with the soft cadences of Paris. "I come to you in desperation, Mr. Holmes. My employer, Madame Elise Vautrin, attachée to the French embassy, was found dead this morning in her private chambers. The police call it heart failure, but I know better. She was poisoned by this." She held aloft the vial, its contents glinting ominously. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity that signaled his mind was already racing. "A serious accusation, mademoiselle. What leads you to suspect poison?" Mademoiselle Dubois' hands tightened around the vial, her knuckles white through her gloves. This was Madame Vautrin's perfume, crafted especially for her in Paris. She wore it daily, a blend of jasmine and bergamot, with a warmth she cherished. But this morning, when I entered her room to wake her, I found her lifeless, her face contorted in pain. The air was heavy with the scent, but there was something wrong, a bitter undertone unlike its usual fragrance. I I handled the bottle myself, and soon after my head spun, my hands trembled. I fear the poison was in the perfume itself. I glanced at Holmes, expecting some immediate dismissal of such a dramatic claim, but his expression was one of acute interest. "A curious case indeed," he murmured. "And you are certain this vial is the one in question?" "Yes," she replied, her voice breaking. "It was on her dressing table, half used. I brought it to you, fearing it might be tampered with further if left at the embassy." Holmes extended a hand, and she placed the vial in his palm with the reverence one might accord a sacred relic. He held it to the gaslight, turning it slowly, his sharp eyes noting every detail of its elegant design. The etched glass, the delicate stopper, the faint residue around the rim. "Exquisite craftsmanship," he remarked. "French, undoubtedly. Watson, your medical opinion?" I took the vial with care, conscious of Mademoiselle Dubois' warning. The bottle was small, no larger than a lady's hand, and its contents shimmered with a golden hue. I removed the stopper and inhaled cautiously, detecting the floral notes she had described, overlaid with a faint, acrid bitterness that set my nerves on edge. "It could be any number of toxins," I said, my mind racing through my recent studies. "Arsenic, perhaps, or a subtler alkaloid like strychnine or prussic acid. The symptoms you describe, dizziness, trembling, could align with such poisons, though I would need to examine the body to confirm." Holmes nodded, his gaze still fixed on the vial. "And what of Madame Vautrin's circumstances, mademoiselle? You mentioned she was an attaché. Had she enemies, or was there any matter that might have provoked such a drastic act?" Mademoiselle Dubois hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. "Madame was formidable. She handled delicate negotiations, matters of trade and diplomacy between England and France. She spoke often of her work, though never in detail. But in recent weeks she grew anxious. She received letters, unsigned I believe, warning her to abandon certain inquiries. She dismissed them as idle threats, but I saw fear in her eyes. She confided in me that she had uncovered something, a secret that could upset the balance, as she put it. I know no more than that." Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that suggested he had already glimpsed the outlines of a puzzle. "A diplomat with secrets, a poisoned perfume, and a fog-bound city. Watson, we are in the presence of a singular problem." He turned back to Mademoiselle Dubois. "You were wise to come to me. Leave the vial here and return tomorrow at noon. I shall have questions and perhaps answers." She rose, her veil falling back into place, and murmured her thanks. "You are my only hope, Mr. Holmes. Madame Vautrin was kind to me, more than an employer. I cannot bear the thought that her death will go unavenged." As the door closed behind her, the faint clatter of her footsteps fading down the stairs, Holmes sprang from his chair, his languor replaced by a feverish energy. He held the vial aloft once more, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "Watson, we have a case. A poisoned perfume, a diplomat's death, and the shadow of international intrigue. This is no ordinary murder, if murder it be. Fetch your coat and revolver." "We are for the French embassy at once," I protested, as I often did at the hour and the weather. "Holmes, it's nearly 9 o'clock and the fog is thick as pea soup. Surely the embassy will be closed." "Nonsense," he replied, already donning his deerstalker and greatcoat. "Crime does not keep office hours, nor does diplomacy. The embassy will yield its secrets tonight, or I am not Sherlock Holmes." I sighed, knowing resistance was futile, and retrieved my coat from the rack. As we descended the stairs, the fog seemed to press closer, a silent accomplice to the mystery unfolding before us. The clatter of a hansom cab awaited, its driver a dim shape in the mist, and I could not shake the feeling that we were stepping into a web far more intricate than even Holmes yet realized. Chapter 2. The Scent of Suspicion. The fog that draped London in the autumn of 1889 was a living thing, curling through the streets like a thief, muffling the clamor of the city and veiling its secrets in a shroud of gray. Sherlock Holmes and I sat within the cramped confines of a hansom cab, its wheels jolting over the slick cobblestones as we sped toward the French embassy off Pall Mall. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wool, coal smoke, and the faint, briny undertone of the nearby Thames. Holmes, his deerstalker pulled low, stared into the mist, his long fingers drumming a restless tattoo on the seat. I, gripping my coat against the chill and my revolver for reassurance, felt the weight of Mademoiselle Claire Dubois' tale pressing upon me. A poisoned perfume, a diplomat's death, and a mystery that seemed to thicken with the fog. "Holmes," I ventured, my voice barely rising above the creak of the cab, "this notion of a poisoned perfume is extraordinary. Could such a subtle method truly deliver a fatal dose? It seems the stuff of melodrama." Holmes turned, his eyes catching the faint glow of the cab's lantern, sharp and unyielding as ever. "Melodrama, Watson, is often the cloak of truth. Poison is the weapon of patience and precision, and a perfume, applied daily, trusted implicitly, is a perfect vessel for murder." The bitter undertone Mademoiselle Dubois described suggests a volatile toxin, perhaps prussic acid or an alkaloid. "We shall confirm it soon enough, but first we must examine the scene of the crime." The cab slowed as we approached the embassy, its pale stone facade looming through the fog like a spectral fortress. The gas lamps flanking its entrance flickered, their light swallowed by the mist, casting an ethereal glow over the square. A stern-faced porter, his breath visible in the damp air, scrutinized us before admitting us with a reluctant nod, swayed by Holmes's murmured mention of urgent business and a discreetly flourished card. We were led through marble corridors, their walls adorned with gilded portraits of French dignitaries, their eyes seeming to follow us as we ascended to Madame Elise Vautrin's private chambers. The room was a study in opulence, its silk draperies shimmering faintly under the gaslight, their deep crimson folds catching the glow like spilled wine. A mahogany desk stood against one wall, cluttered with papers, some bearing the wax seals of diplomatic missives, their edges curled as though handled in haste. A dressing table held a silver mirror, a scattering of hairpins, and a crystal vial, twin to the one Dubois had brought, its amber contents half depleted, glinting ominously. The air was thick with the cloying scent of jasmine and bergamot, laced with that bitter, acrid note that set my nerves on edge, a silent accusation of murder. Madame Vautrin lay upon a velvet chaise longue, her body draped with a silk sheet, her face visible. A woman of perhaps 40, her elegant features frozen in a rictus of agony, her lips faintly blue. Holmes's gaze swept the room like a hawk's, missing nothing. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to a shattered teacup on the Persian rug, its porcelain fragments scattered amidst a dark stain of spilled tea. A moment of panic, perhaps a realization of danger. And here, he knelt by the dressing table, his fingers brushing the vial's stopper, still slick with residue. The perfume was applied shortly before her death, the scent still potent. I approached the body, my medical instincts overriding the chill that ran through me. Madame Vautrin's hands were clenched, her nails digging into her palms, and her dilated pupils and cyanotic lips confirmed my suspicions. "No external wounds," I noted, my voice low. "The bluish tinge and pupil dilation suggest a rapid poison, likely cyanide-based, as I suspected. The symptoms align with Mademoiselle Dubois' account of her own dizziness after handling the vial." Holmes nodded, his attention shifting to the desk. He lifted a sheet of paper, its cryptic symbols scrawled in black ink, and studied it with narrowed eyes. "A French diplomatic cipher," he murmured, "used for sensitive trade negotiations. These papers suggest Madame Vautrin was entangled in matters of international consequence, perhaps too consequential for some. He pocketed the sheet, his movements swift, and turned to the vial, inhaling its scent cautiously. The bitter note is unmistakable, Watson. Not merely floral. We must analyze this at Baker Street, but first, let us speak to those who knew her. The porter returned, ushering in Monsieur Henri Lefebvre, the embassy's chargé d'affaires. He was a wiry man, his waxed mustache quivering slightly, his eyes evasive beneath a veneer of polished courtesy. His cuffs, I noted, bore faint ink stains, a detail Holmes's glance did not miss. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice clipped. "This is a tragic loss, but Madame Vautrin's heart was weak. Her physician will attest to it. Surely this is a natural death." Holmes's smile was thin, almost predatory. "Natural, monsieur? Curious, then, that the air carries the scent of bitter almonds and a teacup lies shattered in distress. Who had access to this room in the hours before her death?" Lefebvre's fingers twitched, brushing his cuff. "Only Mademoiselle Dubois, her maid, and myself. Monsieur Dupont, her perfumer, delivered a new batch of perfume yesterday, but he was not alone with her. The embassy is secure, Mr. Holmes." "And the threats she received?" Holmes pressed, his voice soft but unyielding. "Mademoiselle Dubois spoke of letters warning Madame Vautrin to abandon her inquiries." Lefebvre's mustache twitched again, his eyes darting to the floor. "She was prone to exaggeration. Diplomats receive such threats. Disgruntled merchants, rival envoys. They were of no consequence." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "No consequence, yet she lies dead and her perfume is tainted. Your cuffs, monsieur, bear ink stains matching the cipher on her desk. A coincidence, perhaps?" Lefebvre's face flushed, his voice rising. "You accuse me, sir? I am a diplomat, not a criminal. Those papers are confidential, and I will not be slandered." Holmes rose, his height imposing in the gaslight. "Slander requires falsehood, monsieur. We shall see. Watson, we have what we need for now." He turned to the porter, his tone brisk. "We will return tomorrow. Ensure nothing in this room is touched." As we stepped back into the fog, the embassy's doors closing with a heavy thud, Holmes's voice was low and urgent. "Lefebvre lies, Watson. His hands betrayed him when he spoke of Dupont, and the ink stains link him to the cipher. We must find this perfumer, and then Leclerc, the courier he named. The scent of suspicion grows stronger." The cab awaited, its horse snorting in the damp air. As we rattled towards Soho, I could not shake the image of Madame Vautrin's contorted face, nor the bitter scent that clung to the vial. Holmes sat beside me, his profile sharp against the dim lantern, his mind a crucible forging order from chaos. The embassy's opulence hid a darkness, and I knew he would pierce it, as surely as a blade through the fog. Chapter 3. The embassy's secrets. The fog that enveloped London on that autumn evening of 1889 seemed to seep into the very walls of the French embassy, lending an air of secrecy to its marble corridors and gilded chambers. Sherlock Holmes and I had returned to the embassy after our visit to Monsieur Dupont's perfumery. The vial of tainted perfume secure in Holmes's pocket, its bitter scent a constant reminder of the mystery we pursued. The embassy's grandeur, with its polished floors and portraits of stern-faced diplomats, felt oppressive under the weight of Madame Elise Vautrin's death. We were ushered into a drawing room, its heavy draperies muffling the sounds of the outside world, where Monsieur Henri Lefebvre, the chargé d'affaires, awaited us. Lefebvre stood by a towering fireplace, its flames casting flickering shadows across his angular face. His waxed mustache twitched slightly, and his eyes, though guarded, betrayed a flicker of unease as he greeted us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "I trust your inquiries progress. Madame Vautrin's death is a tragedy, but I assure you it was a natural failing of the heart. The embassy is eager to put this matter to rest." Holmes settled into a plush armchair, his posture deceptively relaxed, though I knew his mind was as taut as a bowstring. "Natural, Monsieur Lefebvre?" he said, his tone light but edged with steel. A curious diagnosis, given the bitter scent of almonds lingering in her chambers and the shattered teacup suggesting distress. "Tell me, who had access to Madame Vautrin's private rooms in the hours before her death?" Lefebvre's fingers brushed his cuff, a gesture I now recognized as a nervous tic, and I noted the faint ink stains on his sleeve, a detail Holmes had remarked upon earlier. "As I told you," he replied, "only Mademoiselle Claire Dubois, her maid, and I had regular access. Monsieur Dupont, the perfumer, visited yesterday to deliver her new perfume, but he was not alone with her. The embassy is secure, Mr. Holmes. No stranger could have entered unnoticed." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on Lefebvre's hands. "And yet a stranger's hand may not be required when treachery resides within. Madame Vautrin spoke of threats, did she not? Letters warning her to cease certain inquiries?" Lefebvre's composure faltered, his mustache twitching again. "She mentioned such things, yes, but they were trifles. Diplomats are accustomed to such posturing. Merchants upset over trade terms, minor officials seeking leverage. She was prone to exaggeration, I'm afraid." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "Exaggeration does not shatter teacups, monsieur, nor does it taint perfume with poison. What was the nature of her inquiries? I understand she was involved in sensitive trade negotiations." Lefebvre hesitated, his eyes darting to the fire. "Her work was confidential, as is much of what we do here. She handled negotiations regarding tariffs on French wines, a matter of some contention, but I assure you it was routine." "Routine," Holmes repeated, his smile thin. "Yet her desk bore coded missives, written in a cipher known to few. I wonder, monsieur, if those codes might reveal more than your assurances." Lefebvre's face paled, and he adjusted his cravat, a gesture that seemed to betray more than he intended. "You overstep, Mr. Holmes. Those papers are diplomatic property beyond your purview." Holmes rose, his height imposing in the dim light. "Murder, monsieur, is within my purview. We shall speak again." He turned to me, his voice brisk. "Come, Watson. The embassy's secrets will not yield themselves so easily." As we left the drawing room, the porter escorted us to the corridor, but Holmes paused, his keen eyes scanning the walls. "Observe, Watson," he whispered, pointing to a faint scuff mark on the baseboard near Madame Vautrin's door. "A boot, too large for a woman's and recent given the lack of dust. Someone lingered here, perhaps listening or tampering." I nodded, my medical mind turning to the symptoms of poisoning I had observed. "Holmes, the cyanosis and dilated pupils suggest a rapid toxin, likely cyanide, as I mentioned. But how could it be administered through perfume? The skin absorbs slowly unless the poison was inhaled," Holmes finished, his eyes gleaming. "A volatile compound vaporized when the perfume was applied. Ingenious, Watson. The killer relied on Madame Vautrin's daily ritual. We must test the vial's contents at once, but first, let us speak to the staff." We were led to a small anteroom where the embassy's housekeeper, Madame Garnier, a stout woman with a severe bun and a no-nonsense demeanor, awaited us. Her hands were folded tightly and her lips were pursed as though guarding a secret. "I know little of Madame Vautrin's affairs," she said before Holmes could speak. "She kept to herself save for her work. Mademoiselle Dubois was closest to her." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "And what of visitors? Did anyone unusual call upon her in recent days?" Madame Garnier hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the door. There was a man, a courier, Leclerc, who brought packages from Paris. He came often, delivering oils for her perfumes. Madame Vautrin trusted him, though I found him unsavory. Leclerc, Holmes said, his voice sharp. The same who supplied Monsieur Dupont. Did he enter her chambers? Once or twice, she admitted, but always with Mademoiselle Dubois present. Madame was particular about her privacy. Holmes nodded, his mind clearly racing. And Mademoiselle Dubois, how did she seem in the days before Madame Vautrin's death? Madame Garnier's lips tightened. Nervous, perhaps. She was devoted to Madame, but lately she seemed distracted. I thought it was the strain of her duties. As we left the anteroom, Holmes's voice was low. Devotion, Watson, or duplicity? Mademoiselle Dubois' story grows more complex. She brought us the vial, yet her own symptoms suggest either truth or a clever performance. We must tread carefully. We returned to Madame Vautrin's chambers, where Holmes examined the desk with renewed focus. He lifted a letter, its wax seal broken, and studied the cryptic symbols within. A substitution cipher, he murmured. Not overly complex, but sufficient to conceal sensitive matters. These letters discuss a trade agreement, but there's a reference to a third party. Someone outside the official channels. Madame Vautrin was on the verge of exposing a scheme, Watson. I frowned, my mind struggling to keep pace. A scheme? You mean espionage? Perhaps, Holmes said, pocketing the letter. Or profiteering disguised as diplomacy. The embassy is a nest of secrets, and Lefebvre is at its heart. His ink-stained cuff matches the handwriting on these notes, and his unease betrays knowledge he dares not share. The porter reappeared, his expression dour. Gentlemen, it is late. The ambassador requests you conclude your inquiries. Holmes's smile was cold. We shall, but not before we have answers. Tell Monsieur Lefebvre I expect his full cooperation tomorrow. As we stepped into the fog once more, the embassy's doors closing with a heavy thud, Holmes's voice was grim. Lefebvre is our linchpin, Watson, but Leclerc and Dubois are threads in the same web. We must find Leclerc at the Black Anchor, and we must test that perfume. The scent of suspicion grows stronger, and I fear the truth lies deeper than we yet perceive. The cab awaited, its lantern a feeble beacon in the mist. As we rattled toward Whitechapel, I could not shake the image of Madame Vautrin's contorted face, nor the bitter scent that clung to the vial. Holmes beside me was silent, his mind a crucible forging order from the chaos of clues. The embassy's secrets were many, but I knew he would unravel them, as surely as the fog would, lift with the dawn. Chapter 4. A Trail Through the Fog. The fog that cloaked London in the autumn of 1889 seemed to thicken with every step we took from the French embassy, as though the city itself were conspiring to obscure the truth of Madame Elise Vautrin's death. Sherlock Holmes and I sat in a hansom cab, its wheels grinding over the slick cobblestones as we made our way to Soho, where Monsieur Dupont's perfumery awaited. The air was heavy with damp and the acrid scent of coal smoke, and I clutched my coat tighter, the weight of my revolver in my pocket a small comfort against the uncertainty of our quest. Holmes beside me held the crystal vial of tainted perfume, turning it thoughtfully in his gloved hands, its amber contents catching the faint glow of the cab's lantern. Holmes, I ventured, my voice low against the creak of the cab. This Leclerc, the courier Dupont mentioned, do you believe he's the key to the poison? He could be a mere pawn, unaware of what he carried. Holmes's eyes glinted, sharp and unyielding. A pawn, perhaps, Watson, but pawns are often moved by a cunning hand. Leclerc delivered the oils to Dupont, and those oils became the vehicle for murder. Whether he knew their nature or not, he is a link in the chain. We shall find him and he shall speak. The cab slowed as we reached Soho, its narrow streets alive with the flicker of gas lamps and the shadows of late-night revelers. Monsieur Dupont's perfumery stood at the corner of a crooked lane, its windows aglow with the promise of exotic scents. The shop's sign, gilded and ornate, proclaimed Parfum Dupont, and its display was a dazzling array of crystal bottles, each catching the light like a jewel. We stepped inside, and the air enveloped us in a symphony of fragrances: rosewater, lavender, sandalwood, and the faint chemical tang of distillation. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with vials and flasks, while a workbench in the corner held mortars, pipettes, and bottles of raw oils. Monsieur Dupont, a portly man with a florid face and ink-stained fingers, looked up from his ledger as we entered, his nervous smile faltering. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "I did not expect you so soon. Have you news of Madame Vautrin's death?" Holmes wasted no time, holding up the vial with a gesture that commanded attention. "This, Monsieur Dupont, is the perfume you crafted for Madame Vautrin. Mademoiselle Dubois claims it is poisoned, and I detect a bitter undertone, prussic acid, perhaps. What say you to that?" Dupont's face drained of color, and he took a step back, his hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Poisoned? Mon Dieu, impossible. I crafted that blend myself, jasmine, bergamot, a touch of amber, all from the finest oils. I have used them for years without issue. Madame Vautrin was particular, and I took every care." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting, his voice calm but cutting. "Yet, this batch differs, monsieur. A bitter scent, unmistakable to those who know death's perfume. Who supplied the oils you used?" Dupont's eyes darted to the workbench, where a crate of small bottles bore the marks of a Parisian supplier. "A courier, Leclerc, brought them from Paris 2 days ago. I have dealt with him before. He is reliable, if coarse. I mixed the oils as always, following Madame Vautrin's recipe. I swear, Mr. Holmes, I added nothing harmful." "Reliable," Holmes repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. He stepped closer to the workbench, his long fingers tracing the edge of a bottle labeled Huile de Base. "And did you examine these oils before using them? Or did you assume their purity as you assumed Leclerc's honesty?" Dupont swallowed hard, his jowls trembling. I confess I did not test them closely. My reputation rests on trust, Mr. Holmes. The supplier in Paris is renowned, and Leclerc has never failed me. But the oils were sealed, as always, and I mixed them precisely as instructed. Holmes picked up one of the bottles, removing its stopper and inhaling deeply. His brow furrowed, and he passed it to me. "Watson, your opinion?" I sniffed cautiously, detecting the familiar floral notes, but beneath them a faint acrid bite, not unlike the vial from Madame Vautrin's chambers. "It's subtle," I said, "but there's a bitterness here similar to the perfume. It could be contamination or deliberate tampering." Holmes nodded, his eyes never leaving Dupont. "Contamination or conspiracy? Tell me, monsieur, where might we find this Leclerc?" Dupont hesitated, his hands wringing the apron. "He frequents a tavern in Whitechapel, the Black Anchor. A rough place, but he is often there, drinking with sailors and couriers. I know little else of him, save that he travels often between London and Paris." Holmes's smile was thin, almost predatory. "You have been most helpful, Monsieur Dupont. We shall speak again, should the need arise." He turned to leave, but paused at the door, his voice soft but commanding. "One last question. Did Madame Vautrin ever mention enemies or threats related to her work?" Dupont's eyes widened, and he shook his head vigorously. "No, never. She was a private woman, devoted to her duties. She spoke only of her love for the perfume, how it reminded her of Paris." As we stepped back into the fog, the perfumery's warmth fading behind us, Holmes's voice was low and urgent. Dupin is either a fool or a liar, Watson. His negligence allowed the poison to reach Madame Vautrin, but his fear suggests he knows more than he admits. Leclerc is our next step, but I suspect the true orchestrator lies closer to the embassy. The cab rattled toward Whitechapel, the fog growing denser, swallowing the gas lamps until they were mere pinpricks of light. I shifted uneasily, my thoughts returning to Madame Vautrin's chambers. The shattered teacup, the coded letters, Lefebvre's nervous tics. "Holmes," I said, "do you believe Leclerc acted alone, or is he part of a larger scheme? The embassy's secrecy suggests something beyond a personal vendetta." Holmes's fingers tapped the vial in his pocket. "A scheme, Watson, rooted in the shadows of diplomacy. Madame Vautrin uncovered something, perhaps a betrayal in the trade negotiations or a deeper intrigue. The coded letters suggest a third party, someone with influence. Leclerc may have tainted the oils, but he did not act without direction." We fell silent as the cab navigated the labyrinthine streets, the sounds of London muted by the fog. The Black Anchor lay ahead, a den of rough voices and flickering lanterns where Leclerc awaited. Whether as pawn or perpetrator, we would soon discover. Holmes's profile was sharp against the dim light, his mind a crucible forging order from the chaos of clues. The trail through the fog was treacherous, but I knew he would follow it to its end, as surely as the scent of poison lingered in the air. Chapter 5. The Perfumer's Confession. The fog that shrouded London in the autumn of 1889 seemed to grow more oppressive as our hansom cab rattled toward Whitechapel, its wheels splashing through puddles that reflected the dim glow of gas lamps. The air was thick with the stench of coal smoke, stale beer, and the faint, briny tang of the nearby docks. Sherlock Holmes sat beside me, his face half hidden by the upturned collar of his greatcoat, his fingers still tracing the outline of the tainted perfume vial in his pocket. The revelations at Monsieur Dupin's perfumery had sharpened his focus, and I could sense the restless energy coursing through him like a hound catching the scent of its quarry. Our destination was the Black Anchor, a notorious tavern where Leclerc, the courier implicated in delivering the poisoned oils, was said to hold court among Whitechapel's rougher denizens. "Holmes," I said, my voice low to avoid the driver's ears. "If Leclerc tampered with the oils, he must have had a motive or a paymaster. A courier doesn't risk murder without reason." Holmes's eyes glinted in the dim light of the cab's lantern. "Precisely, Watson. Leclerc is a link, not the chain itself. His role was to deliver the means of murder, but the hand that guided him lies elsewhere, likely within the embassy's gilded walls. We must extract the truth from him, and quickly." The cab slowed as we entered Whitechapel's labyrinthine streets, where the fog seemed to cling to the crumbling tenements and narrow alleys like a living thing. The Black Anchor stood at the end of a crooked lane, its sign swinging faintly in the damp breeze, its windows glowing with the sickly yellow light of oil lamps. The sounds of coarse laughter and the clink of glasses spilled into the night, mingling with the distant wail of a ship's horn on the Thames. Holmes adjusted his coat, adopting the slouch and swagger of a dock worker, his deerstalker replaced by a flat cap pulled low over his brow. "Stay close, Watson," he murmured, "and keep your revolver at hand. Whitechapel is no place for gentlemen tonight." We entered the tavern, and the air hit us like a wall, thick with tobacco smoke, the reek of unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of cheap gin. Rough men in patched coats and sailors with weathered faces crowded the bar, their voices a cacophony of shouts and curses. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the room until they settled on a gaunt figure in the corner, hunched over a mug of ale. The man's face was scarred, one cheek marred by a jagged line that spoke of a violent past, and his eyes darted nervously as though expecting trouble. "That's Leclerc," Holmes whispered, nodding toward the man. Observe his posture. Guarded but not cautious enough. He's speaking to a companion, and the topic is not idle. He slipped into a nearby booth, his disguise flawless, and I followed, my heart pounding as I kept my hand near my revolver. Leclerc's voice, low and guttural, carried just enough for us to catch fragments of his conversation. The lady got what she deserved, he hissed to his companion, a burly man with a sailor's tattooed forearms. Poking her nose into things she shouldn't. Secrets that could ruin better men than me. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer, his ear tuned to every word. The sailor grunted, draining his mug. And the pay? You said it was good. Good enough, Leclerc replied, his scarred face twisting into a smirk. Enough to keep me in gin for a year, but I didn't know it'd kill her, just taint the oils, he said. Make her sick, teach her a lesson. I glanced at Holmes, whose expression was unreadable but intense. He signaled for me to remain silent, his attention fixed on Leclerc. The courier's words confirmed our suspicions. The perfume was deliberately poisoned, but by whose order? Holmes rose, his movements casual but deliberate, and approached Leclerc's table, adopting the rough accent of a dock worker. Oi, mate, he said, clapping Leclerc on the shoulder with a familiarity that made the man flinch. Heard you talking about some fancy oils. Got any left for a bloke looking to make a shilling? Leclerc's eyes widened, and he shoved his chair back, his hand reaching for a knife at his belt. Who are you? He snarled. This ain't your business. Holmes's smile was cold, his voice dropping to its natural timbre. It is very much my business, Monsieur Leclerc. I am Sherlock Holmes, and you will tell me who paid you to taint Madame Vautrin's perfume. Leclerc bolted, knocking over his mug in a spray of ale. He darted toward the tavern's back door, shoving through the crowd with surprising agility. Holmes was after him in an instant, his long legs closing the distance, and I followed, my revolver, drawn but concealed beneath my coat. The tavern's patrons barely glanced our way, accustomed to sudden disturbances in such a place. We burst into an alley behind the Black Anchor, the fog so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. Leclerc's footsteps echoed ahead, and Holmes pursued with the relentlessness of a bloodhound. The alley twisted, its walls slick with damp, and I struggled to keep pace, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Leclerc stumbled over a pile of refuse, and Holmes seized the moment, tackling him against a brick wall with a force that drove the air from the man's lungs. Talk, Leclerc, Holmes said, his voice low and menacing, his forearm pinning the courier's throat. What did you add to the oils, and who paid you? Leclerc's eyes were wild, but fear loosened his tongue. Prussic acid, he gasped. Just a drop, mixed into the base oils before I delivered them to DuPont. I didn't know it'd kill her, I swear it. I was told it'd make her sick, keep her out of the way for a bit. Holmes's grip tightened. Who paid you? A name, Leclerc, or you'll find Newgate less forgiving than this alley. Leclerc's scarred face contorted, his voice a hoarse whisper. A man at the embassy. Didn't give his name, just a gentleman, fancy suit, ink on his cuffs. Gave me a purse of sovereigns and said to keep my mouth shut. Holmes released him, stepping back as Leclerc slumped against the wall, clutching his throat. Ink on his cuffs, Holmes murmured, his eyes gleaming. Monsieur Lefebvre, no doubt. But why? What did Madame Vautrin know that warranted her death? I stepped forward, my medical instincts urging caution. Holmes, if prussic acid was used, it explains the symptoms. Cyanosis, rapid collapse. But how did it go undetected by DuPont? Holmes's gaze was distant, his mind already racing ahead. Negligence, Watson, or complicity? DuPont's fear suggests the former, but we cannot rule out the latter. Leclerc is a tool, not the craftsman. We must return to the embassy and confront Lefebvre. Leclerc, still panting, made a desperate lunge for freedom, but Holmes was swifter, tripping him with a deft movement. "You'll stay, monsieur," he said, binding Leclerc's wrists with a length of cord from his pocket. "The police will have questions for you." We left Leclerc in the alley, signaling a passing constable to take him into custody. As we climbed back into the cab, the fog seemed to press closer, a silent witness to the unfolding mystery. Holmes's face was grim, his fingers tapping the vial in his pocket. "Lefebvre is the key, Watson, but Mademoiselle Dubois' role troubles me. Her devotion to Madame Vautrin may be genuine, yet her symptoms, dizziness, trembling, could be a performance to deflect suspicion. We must tread carefully." The cab rattled back toward Baker Street, where Holmes planned to analyze the perfume's contents. The scent of suspicion hung, heavy, and I could not shake the image of Leclerc's scarred face, his confession echoing in the fog. The trail was growing clearer, but the shadows of the embassy loomed larger, hiding secrets that only Holmes could unravel. Chapter 6. A Dangerous Disguise. The fog that cloaked London in the autumn of 1889 seemed to pulse with secrets as Sherlock Holmes and I returned from the grim encounter with Leclerc in Whitechapel. The courier's confession that he had tainted Madame Elise Vautrin's perfume with prussic acid at the behest of a man with ink-stained cuffs pointed directly to Monsieur Henri Lefebvre, the embassy's chargé d'affaires. Yet Holmes, ever cautious, suspected a deeper web of intrigue, one that might ensnare even Mademoiselle Claire Dubois, whose tale of devotion and dizziness seemed less certain with each revelation. As our hansom cab rattled back toward Baker Street, Holmes's silence was a storm of thought, his fingers tracing the outline of the poisoned vial in his pocket. "Holmes," I ventured, my voice low against the creak of the cab's springs, "Leclerc's confession implicates Lefebvre. But why would a diplomat risk murder? And what of Mademoiselle Dubois? Her symptoms could be genuine, or a clever ruse." Holmes's eyes glinted in the dim light. "Precisely, Watson. Lefebvre's ink-stained cuffs align with the coded letters on Madame Vautrin's desk. But his motive remains obscured. Was it personal gain or a directive from a higher power? As for Mademoiselle Dubois, her role is ambiguous, victim, accomplice, or something else entirely. We must penetrate the embassy's defenses to uncover the truth, and I have a plan." Back at 201B Baker Street, the familiar clutter of our sitting room offered a brief respite from the fog's oppressive embrace. The fire crackled in the grate, casting shadows across Holmes's chemical apparatus and the violin resting on a pile of papers. He set the vial on the table and began preparations for analysis, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. "Watson," he said, rummaging through a trunk in the corner, "tonight we return to the embassy, but not as ourselves." I raised an eyebrow, accustomed to his penchant for theatrics. "A disguise, Holmes?" He emerged with a bundle of clothing, a clerk's drab suit, a false mustache, and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. "Precisely. I shall enter as Monsieur Pierre Fournier, a minor functionary from the Paris office, sent to review diplomatic correspondence. You will remain outside, keeping watch. If Lefebvre is hiding evidence, it will be in his office, likely in a safe." I protested, as I often did, at the danger of such a scheme. "Holmes, the embassy is a fortress. If you're caught, it could mean scandal, or worse." His smile was grim. "Then I shall not be caught, Watson. Fetch your revolver and meet me at Pall Mall in 2 hours. The fog will be our ally." By midnight, the fog had thickened, shrouding the embassy's pale stone facade in a veil of mystery. I took up position in an alley across the street, my coat pulled tight against the damp, my revolver a reassuring weight in my pocket. Holmes, transformed into the unassuming Monsieur Fournier, approached the embassy's side entrance, his posture stooped, his false mustache impeccable. He carried a forged letter of introduction, its wax seal a meticulous imitation of the French diplomatic crest. The porter, bleary-eyed from the late hour, admitted him with a cursory glance, and Holmes disappeared into the building's labyrinthine corridors. Inside, Holmes moved like a shadow, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The embassy was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of a night watchman or the creak of settling wood. Lefebvre's office lay on the second floor, its door locked but no match for Holmes's skill with a set of picks. The lock yielded with a soft click and he slipped inside, closing the door behind him. The room was a study in understated power. Mahogany panels, a broad desk strewn with papers, and a portrait of Napoleon glowering from the wall. A small safe concealed behind a sliding panel caught his eye. Holmes knelt before the safe, his ear pressed to its surface as he turned the dial with delicate precision. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open, revealing a sheaf of papers bound in red ribbon. He scanned them quickly, his keen eyes deciphering the coded text. Letters implicating Lefebvre in a scheme to sabotage trade negotiations with Britain, funneling profits to a shadowy third party. One document bore Madame Vautrin's initials alongside a note, "Proof of betrayal must act." It was clear she had uncovered Lefebvre's treachery and it had cost her life. As Holmes pocketed the papers, a faint sound, a rustle of fabric, came from the corridor. He froze, his hand on the safe's door, and peered through the keyhole. A figure stood just outside, cloaked and veiled, their face obscured. The figure hesitated, then moved away, their footsteps fading into the silence. Holmes's mind raced. Was this Mademoiselle Dubois, or another player in this deadly game? He slipped out of the office, relocking the door, and moved swiftly down the corridor, his clerk's disguise still intact. But as he reached the staircase, a watchman appeared, his lantern casting a harsh light. "You there," the man barked. "What business have you at this hour?" Holmes, as Fournier, adopted a flustered tone, his French accent flawless. "Monsieur, I am sent from Paris to review urgent dispatches. I was told to work late." The watchman's eyes narrowed, but he waved Holmes on. "Be quick about it. No loitering." Holmes descended to the side entrance, where I waited in the alley, my nerves taut. He emerged, his face pale but triumphant, and we hurried into the fog, the embassy's lights fading behind us. "Watson," he said, his voice low, "the papers confirm Madame Vautrin's discovery. A plot to undermine trade agreements with Lefebvre at its heart. She was silenced to protect it." I gripped my revolver, glancing over my shoulder. "And the veiled figure? Did you see who it was?" Holmes shook his head. "Not clearly, but their presence suggests we are watched. It may be Dubois, or another ally of Lefebvre's. We must test the perfume's contents to confirm Leclerc's confession and then confront Lefebvre." As we climbed into a waiting cab, the fog seemed to close around us, a silent witness to the secrets we had uncovered. Holmes's disguise had served its purpose, but the danger was far from over. The embassy's shadows held more than papers. They held the truth of Madame Vautrin's murder. And I knew Holmes would not rest until it was brought to light. Chapter 7. The Diplomat's Deception. The fog that enveloped London in the autumn of 1889 seemed to tighten its grip as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way back to the French embassy, the weight of our discoveries pressing heavily upon us. The coded letters Holmes had retrieved from Lefebvre's safe painted a damning picture, a plot to sabotage trade negotiations with Madame Elise Vautrin's death as its tragic consequence. Leclerc's confession in the Whitechapel alley had pointed to a man with ink-stained cuffs, and Holmes was certain that man was Monsieur Henri Lefebvre, the embassy's chargé d'affaires. Yet the veiled figure Holmes had glimpsed in the embassy's corridors added a layer of mystery, suggesting that Mademoiselle Claire Dubois, or perhaps another, was entangled in this web of deceit. As our hansom cab rattled through the gas-lit streets, the clatter of hooves muffled by the fog, I could sense Holmes's mind racing, piecing together the puzzle with relentless precision. "Holmes," I said, my voice low against the creak of the cab. "Lefebvre's involvement seems clear, but what motive could drive a diplomat to murder? And the veiled figure, could it be Mademoiselle Dubois playing a double game?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the cab's lantern. "Motive, Watson, is the heart of this matter. The letters suggest Lefebvre profited from diverting trade funds, but whether he acted alone or under orders remains to be seen. As for the veiled figure, their presence indicates we are watched, perhaps by an ally of Lefebvre's, or a rival. We must confront him now, before he covers his tracks." The embassy loomed ahead, its pale stone facade ghostly in the fog. The porter, recognizing us from our earlier visits, admitted us with a grudging nod, though his eyes lingered on Holmes as if sensing the storm brewing beneath his calm demeanor. We were led once more to the grand drawing room, where Monsieur Lefebvre awaited, standing by the fireplace, its flames casting long shadows across his angular face. His waxed mustache twitched, and his hands, one bearing the telltale ink stains, adjusted his cravat with a nervous flick. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "I had hoped your inquiries were concluded. The embassy is in mourning, and your persistence disrupts our work." Holmes settled into an armchair, his posture deceptively relaxed, though his eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "Mourning Monsieur Lefebvre. A curious sentiment, given the evidence that Madame Vautrin's death was no natural tragedy. Shall we discuss the coded letters in your safe, or the prussic acid in her perfume?" Lefebvre's face paled, his fingers tightening on the arm of his chair. "You overstep, Mr. Holmes. Those letters are diplomatic correspondence, privileged and beyond your reach. As for the perfume, I know nothing of poisons. Madame Vautrin's heart was weak. Her physician will confirm it." Holmes's smile was thin, almost predatory. "A weak heart does not shatter teacups in distress, nor does it leave a scent of bitter almonds in the air. Leclerc the courier has confessed to tainting the perfume oils with prussic acid, paid by a man with ink-stained cuffs. Curious, is it not, that your cuffs bear such stains and your handwriting matches the coded missives on Madame Vautrin's desk?" Lefebvre's composure cracked, his eyes darting to the door as though seeking escape. "This is preposterous," he cried, rising to his feet. "I am a diplomat, not a murderer. Those letters are routine and ink stains are common in my work. You have no proof." Holmes produced the sheaf of papers from his coat, their red ribbon glinting in the firelight. "No proof, monsieur? These documents taken from your safe detail a scheme to divert trade funds to a third party, undermining negotiations Madame Vautrin was tasked with overseeing. Her initials mark a note warning of betrayal. She discovered your treachery and you silenced her." Lefebvre's hands trembled and he sank back into his chair, his voice hoarse. "You broke into my safe? That is a violation of diplomatic protocol. I shall have you arrested." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "Arrest me, and you invite scrutiny of your own actions. Leclerc named you, monsieur. He described a gentleman with ink on his cuffs, paid to taint the oils. Shall we summon him to confirm it?" Lefebvre's mustache twitched violently and sweat beaded on his brow. "Leclerc is a liar, a low criminal. I paid him for deliveries, nothing more. If he tampered with the oils, it was his own doing, not mine." I watched, my medical instincts noting the rapid pulse at Lefebvre's throat, the flush of panic in his cheeks. "Holmes," I said quietly, "his agitation suggests guilt, but he's desperate to deflect blame. Could someone else have used him as a scapegoat?" Holmes nodded, his eyes never leaving Lefebvre. "A possibility, Watson, but the ink, the letters, and Leclerc's testimony form a chain too strong to ignore. Monsieur Lefebvre, what Was Madame Vautrin's discovery that warranted her death? Lefebvre's voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes fixed on the fire. She was meddling in matters beyond her station. The trade negotiations were delicate, and she questioned certain arrangements. But I swear I did not kill her. The perfume was Dupont's work, and Leclerc delivered it. If there was poison, it was their doing. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and cutting. And yet you profited from the scheme she uncovered. The letters mention a third party. Who is it, monsieur? A foreign agent, a merchant, or perhaps someone within this embassy? Lefebvre's hands clenched, and for a moment I thought he might bolt. But he slumped, defeated, his voice barely audible. I cannot say. There are interests at play larger than you understand. I am a diplomat bound by duty. Accuse me if you must, but you will find no proof of murder. Holmes rose, his height imposing in the firelight. Proof, monsieur, is a matter of time. We shall speak again, and I advise you not to leave London. He turned to me, his voice brisk. Come, Watson. We have more to uncover. As we left the drawing room, the porter's eyes followed us, and I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving in the corridor. A cloaked figure, veiled, slipping out of sight. My heart quickened, and I nudged Holmes. The veiled figure again, I whispered. They're watching us. Holmes's expression was grim. Indeed, Watson. Whether friend or foe, they are part of this puzzle. We must return to Baker Street and analyze the perfume's contents. Lefebvre's deceptions are unraveling, but the truth lies deeper. The fog outside was thicker now, swallowing the embassy's lights as we climbed into the cab. The clatter of hooves and the distant toll of a church bell were the only sounds in the silent night. Holmes's face was a study in concentration, his mind forging connections between Leclerc's confession, Lefebvre's lies, and the veiled figure's elusive presence. The diplomat's deceptions had been laid bare, but the heart of the mystery remained shrouded, and I knew Holmes would not rest until every secret was exposed. Chapter 8. Shadows in the Halles. The fog that blanketed London in the autumn of 1889 seemed to pulse with menace as Sherlock Holmes and I stepped out of the French embassy, the weight of Monsieur Lefebvre's deceptions heavy upon us. His panicked denials and the coded letters stolen from his safe pointed to a scheme of betrayal, with Madame Elise Vautrin's death as its grim culmination. Yet the fleeting glimpse of a veiled figure in the embassy's corridors had added a new layer of intrigue, suggesting that Mademoiselle Claire Dubois, or another, might be more deeply entwined in this deadly plot than we had imagined. The air was damp and bitter, carrying the scent of coal smoke and the faint tang of the Thames as we climbed into a waiting hansom cab, its lantern a feeble beacon in the mist. Holmes, I said, my voice low against the clatter of hooves. The veiled figure. Could it be Mademoiselle Dubois, watching to protect Lefebvre, or perhaps to betray him? Her story of devotion to Madame Vautrin feels increasingly suspect. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light, his fingers tapping the vial of tainted perfume in his pocket. A pertinent question, Watson. Dubois' symptoms, dizziness, trembling, may be genuine, or a calculated performance to deflect suspicion. The veiled figure's presence suggests someone is guarding a secret, and we must uncover it before they vanish into the fog. But first we pursue a lead closer to hand. The cab slowed as we reached a narrow street near Covent Garden, where Holmes had learned of a meeting place used by embassy couriers, a dingy alley known for its discretion and danger. Lefebvre's lies point to a broader conspiracy, Holmes continued, and the veiled figure may be our key to its heart. They fled the embassy as we left, and I suspect they are headed here to meet an accomplice or destroy evidence. We alighted from the cab, the fog so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. The alley was a labyrinth of shadows, its walls slick with damp, its cobblestones uneven underfoot. Gas lamps flickered at intervals, their light diffused into ghostly halos that barely pierced the mist. Holmes moved with the stealth of a predator, his greatcoat blending into the gloom, and I followed, my revolver a reassuring weight in my hand. The air was heavy with the stench of rotting refuse and stale beer, and the distant cry of a street vendor echoed faintly, a reminder of the city beyond this shrouded world. As we rounded a corner, Holmes raised a hand, signaling silence. Ahead, in the dim glow of a lamp, stood the veiled figure, their cloak billowing slightly in the breeze. They were speaking in hushed tones to a man in a rough coat, his face obscured by a slouch hat. The words were indistinct, but the urgency in their gestures was unmistakable. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for me to stay back, his own movements silent as he crept closer, using a stack of crates for cover. The veiled figure handed the man a small package, its shape suggesting a bundle of letters or a vial. "Dispose of it," the figure whispered, their voice low but unmistakably feminine. "No one must find it." The man nodded, tucking the package into his coat, but before he could turn, Holmes sprang forward, his voice sharp and commanding. "Stand where you are," he called, his silhouette looming in the fog. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and I would have words with you both." The man bolted, his footsteps echoing as he vanished into the alley's depths, but the veiled figure froze, their hands clutching the edges of their cloak. Holmes advanced, his eyes piercing the darkness. "Who are you? And what is your business in this affair? Speak, or I shall summon the police." The figure hesitated, then slowly lifted their veil, revealing a face that stunned me. Not Mademoiselle Claire Dubois, but a woman of striking resemblance to Madame Vautrin, her features pale and drawn, her eyes burning with a mix of grief and determination. "I am Sophie Vautrin," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Elise was my sister, and I seek justice for her murder." I stepped forward, my revolver lowered but ready. "Madame Vautrin's sister? Why lurk in shadows, and what was in that package?" Sophie's gaze darted to the alley where the man had fled. "Letters," she said, "are proof of Lefebvre's treachery. Elise sent them to me before her death, warning of a plot to undermine the trade negotiations. I came to London to find the truth, but I fear I am watched." Holmes's expression was unreadable, his mind racing. "And why not come to me directly, madam? Why this secrecy?" Sophie's lips tightened. "I trusted no one, Mr. Holmes. Elise spoke of enemies within the embassy, and I suspected Mademoiselle Dubois. She was too close to Lefebvre, too eager to blame the perfume. I followed her, and then you, hoping to uncover the truth." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Dubois lied, you say. How so?" "She claimed devotion to my sister," Sophie said, her voice bitter. "But I saw her with Lefebvre, whispering in the embassy gardens. She knew of his scheme, and I believe she helped conceal it, perhaps even tampered with the perfume herself." I glanced at Holmes, my medical mind racing. "Holmes, if Dubois was involved, her symptoms could be a fabrication meant to mislead us. But why would she risk her own health?" "A performance, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low. "Or perhaps she was unaware of the poison's potency. Leclerc claimed he was paid to taint the oils, but Dubois may have been the one to apply them, believing they would only sicken, not kill." Sophie's hands clenched. "She betrayed Elise, and I will prove it. Those letters name Lefebvre and a third party, a merchant, I think, profiting from the diverted funds. I gave them to a trusted courier to hide, but now I fear he may betray me too." Holmes's gaze was intense. "Madame, return to your lodgings and remain there. I shall find your courier and retrieve the letters. But tell me, did you see anyone else in the embassy tonight?" Sophie nodded, her eyes haunted. "A man watching from the shadows. Not Lefebvre, but someone with authority. He wore a ring with a red stone, and his presence chilled me." Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. A valuable clue. Watson, we must pursue the courier and confirm Sophie's story. The alley's end leads to Drury Lane. Hurry! We left Sophie in the fog, her figure fading as we plunged deeper into the alley, following the faint echo of the courier's footsteps. The chase was relentless, Holmes's long strides eating up the distance, his eyes scanning the mist for any sign of movement. The alley twisted, its walls closing in, and the gas lamps grew fewer, their lights swallowed by the fog. My breath came in sharp gasps, my revolver clutched tightly as we rounded a corner and spotted the man, his slouch hat bobbing in the distance. Holmes surged forward, tackling the courier against a wall with a force that sent the hat tumbling. "The letters," he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Hand them over or you'll answer to Scotland Yard." The man, panting, produced the bundle, its wax seals matching those from Lefebvre's safe. Holmes scanned them quickly, his eyes gleaming. More proof of Lefebvre's scheme and a name, Sir Reginald Harrow, a merchant with ties to the embassy. Madame Vautrin's sister speaks true. As we bound the courier and signaled a passing constable, the fog seemed to thicken, a silent witness to the unraveling mystery. Holmes's face was grim, his mind already turning to the next step. "Lefebvre, Dubois, and now Harrow," he murmured. "The shadows in this alley hide a conspiracy, Watson, and we are close to its heart." Chapter 9. The final clue. The fog that shrouded London in the autumn of 1889 seemed to linger in my mind as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to the familiar sanctuary of 221B Baker Street, the revelations of the night weighing heavily upon us. The chase through the fog-choked alleys had yielded Sophie Vautrin's letters, confirming a conspiracy led by Monsieur Henri Lefebvre, with the merchant Sir Reginald Harrow as a shadowy accomplice. Yet the role of Mademoiselle Claire Dubois remained ambiguous, her tale of devotion to Madame Elise Vautrin now tainted by Sophie's accusation of betrayal. The vial of poisoned perfume, still unanalyzed, sat on the table, its amber glow a silent testament to the murder we sought to unravel. As we entered our sitting room, the fire's warmth offered a brief respite from the chill, but Holmes's restless energy filled the space like a gathering storm. "Holmes," I said, settling into my armchair, my medical bag at my side. "Sophie Vautrin's story complicates matters. If Dubois colluded with Lefebvre, her symptoms, dizziness, trembling, could be a lie to mislead us. But why risk implicating herself by bringing us the vial?" Holmes, already pacing before the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, paused to light his pipe, the match flaring briefly in the dim light. "A pertinent question, Watson. Dubois' actions suggest either cunning or desperation. If she tampered with the perfume, believing it would only sicken Madame Vautrin, she may have brought us the vial to deflect suspicion, unaware of its lethal potency. But Sophie's claim that Dubois was seen whispering with Lefebvre points to complicity. We need the final clue to tie these threads together." He turned to the table where he had spread the evidence. The coded letters from Lefebvre's safe, Sophie's bundle of correspondence, and the vial of perfume. With swift, deliberate movements, he began pinning the papers to a board, creating a web of connections. Names, dates, and cryptic phrases linked by string. "Observe, Watson," he said, his voice sharp with focus. "The letters from Lefebvre's safe detail a scheme to divert trade funds to Sir Reginald Harrow, a merchant with interests in French wine imports. Madame Vautrin's notes indicate she discovered this, threatening to expose it. Leclerc's confession confirms the poison, prussic acid, was added to the perfume oils paid for by a man with ink-stained cuffs, clearly Lefebvre. But Sophie's letters mention a third party, and her citing of a man with a red stone ring suggests another player." I leaned forward, my medical mind grappling with the chemical implications. "Prussic acid is volatile, Holmes. It could be inhaled when the perfume was applied, explaining Madame Vautrin's rapid collapse. But Dubois' symptoms, if genuine, suggest she handled it too. Could she have been an unwitting accomplice? Holmes's eyes gleamed as he pinned a sketch of the vial to the board. Exactly, Watson. The final clue lies in the perfume itself. We must analyze its contents to confirm Leclerc's claim and determine whether Dubois' exposure was accidental or staged. He moved to his chemical apparatus, a cluttered array of beakers and pipettes in the corner, and carefully removed the stopper from the vial. The air filled with the cloying scent of jasmine and bergamot, undercut by that bitter, acrid note we had come to dread. Using a dropper, Holmes extracted a small amount of the liquid and mixed it with reagents, his movements precise and methodical. I watched, fascinated, as he tested for cyanides, the solution turning a faint blue under his scrutiny. "Prussic acid, as expected," he murmured. "But there's something else. A trace of an alkaloid, possibly to mask the poison's scent." This required skill, Watson, beyond Leclerc's crude tampering. Someone with knowledge of chemistry was involved. I frowned, my thoughts turning to the perfumery. Dupont? He crafted the perfume, but he seemed genuinely shaken. Holmes shook his head, his pipe sending curls of smoke toward the ceiling. Dupont is negligent, not malicious. His fear was that of a man caught in a storm, not of his making. No, the skill lies elsewhere, possibly with Dubois or the man with the red stone ring Sophie described. He returned to the evidence board, his fingers tracing the strings connecting Lefebvre, Harrow, and Dubois. Consider the sequence, Watson. Madame Vautrin uncovers a scheme involving Lefebvre and Harrow. She confides in Sophie, sending letters as proof. Lefebvre, aware of her suspicions, enlists Leclerc to taint the perfume oils, but someone, likely Dubois, applies the fatal dose, perhaps believing it would only incapacitate. The veiled figure Sophie watches the embassy, seeking justice, while another figure, the man with the ring, guards the conspiracy's heart. I nodded, the puzzle taking shape. And the red stone ring? Could it be Harrow or someone higher in the chain? Holmes's gaze was distant, his mind racing. Possibly. Sir Reginald Harrow is a merchant, not a diplomat, yet his influence reaches the embassy. The ring suggests wealth and authority, but we need more to identify him. The final clue lies in Dubois' actions. If she colluded with Lefebvre, her motives must be personal. Loyalty, love, or coercion. He crossed to the window, peering into the fog-shrouded street. We must summon Dubois to Baker Street tomorrow. Her reaction to Sophie's accusations will reveal much. But tonight we prepare for the endgame. Lefebvre's panic and Sophie's letters suggest the conspiracy is unraveling, and the man with the red stone ring may act to protect it. I rose, my heart quickening at the thought of confrontation. Holmes, if Dubois is guilty, she's dangerous, and if Harrow is involved, he may have resources we can't anticipate. Holmes's smile was grim. Danger is our trade, Watson, but we have the advantage, knowledge. The letters, Leclerc's confession, and the perfume's composition form a chain of evidence. We need only the final link to close it. As he spoke, a faint sound came from the street below, a soft footfall barely audible through the fog. Holmes's eyes sharpened, and he motioned for silence. We moved to the window, peering down to see a figure lingering by the lamp-post, cloaked and veiled, their face obscured. "Sophie again," I whispered. Holmes shook his head. "Possibly, but the posture is different, less assured. It may be Dubois, or another drawn by our pursuit. Whoever they are, they confirm we are close to the truth." He returned to the evidence board, adding a note about the red stone ring. "Tomorrow, Watson, we confront Dubois and Lefebvre together. The man with the ring may reveal himself if we apply pressure. For now, we rest, but keep your revolver close." I settled back into my chair, the fire's warmth doing little to ease the chill of anticipation. The room was silent save for the crackle of the hearth and the distant clatter of a cab, but my mind was alive with images. Madame Vautrin's contorted face, Lefebvre's ink-stained cuffs, Sophie's veiled figure, and the elusive man with the red stone ring. Holmes stood before the board, his silhouette a study in determination, piecing together the final clue that would unravel the mystery of the poisoned perfume. Chapter 10. Holmes's deduction. The fog that had cloaked London throughout our investigation in the autumn of 1889 seemed to lift slightly as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared for the final act in the sitting room of 221B Baker Street. The revelations of the past days, Monsieur Lefebvre's treachery, Leclerc's confession, Sophie Vautrin's pursuit of justice, and the elusive man with the red stone ring had woven a complex web around the murder of Madame Elise Vautrin. The vial of poisoned perfume, now confirmed to contain prussic acid and a masking alkaloid, sat on the table, its amber glow a silent accusation. Mademoiselle Claire Dubois had been summoned, along with Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, to hear Holmes's resolution of the case. The fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm but somber light over the cluttered room, where Holmes's evidence board stood, its strings and papers a testament to his relentless logic. As the clock struck noon, a knock announced the arrival of Mademoiselle Dubois, her pale face framed by a black veil, her hands trembling as she entered. Behind her came Lestrade, his ferret-like features set in a mix of skepticism and curiosity, and Monsieur Lefebvre, his mustache twitching, his ink-stained cuffs betraying his unease. Sophie Vautrin followed, her eyes burning with resolve, and a final figure, a portly man with a red stone ring glinting on his finger, introduced as Sir Reginald Harrow, the merchant implicated in the coded letters. The room felt charged, as though the air itself awaited Holmes's verdict. "Mr. Holmes," Lestrade began, his voice gruff, "you've dragged us here with promises of answers. I hope this isn't another of your theatrics. The embassy is in an uproar and we need facts." Holmes, standing by the hearth, his tall frame silhouetted against the flames, raised a hand for silence. "Facts, Inspector, are what I deal in. Pray, be seated, all of you. The truth of Madame Elise Vautrin's murder lies before us, and it is a tale of betrayal, greed, and misplaced loyalty." Mademoiselle Dubois sank into a chair, her eyes darting nervously while Lefebvre's face grew pale, his hands clutching the arms of his seat. Sophie stood rigid, her gaze fixed on Dubois, and Harrow's fingers toyed with his ring, his expression guarded. Holmes began, his voice calm but commanding, as he gestured to the evidence board. "Madame Vautrin, an attaché to the French embassy, was found dead in her chambers, poisoned by her own perfume, laced with prussic acid and a masking alkaloid. The police called it heart failure, but Mademoiselle Dubois, her maid, brought me this vial, claiming it was tainted. Her own symptoms, dizziness, trembling, suggested exposure, but also raised suspicion. Was she victim or accomplice?" Dubois gasped, her hands rising to her face. "I loved Madame Vautrin. I would never harm her." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Patience, mademoiselle. Let us trace the chain. The perfume was crafted by Monsieur Dupont, a perfumer in Soho, using oils delivered by a courier, Leclerc. Leclerc confessed to tainting the oils with prussic acid paid by a man with ink-stained cuffs." He turned to Lefebvre, whose mustache twitched violently. "Monsieur Lefebvre, your cuffs betray you, as do the coded letters in your safe, detailing a scheme to divert trade funds to a third party, Sir Reginald Harrow." Lefebvre sprang to his feet, his voice shrill. "Lies! I am a diplomat, not a murderer. Those letters are diplomatic correspondence, nothing more." Holmes's smile was cold. Correspondence that Madame Vautrin discovered threatening to expose your scheme. The letters, confirmed by her sister Sophie, detail payments to Harrow for manipulating French wine tariffs. You stood to gain handsomely, but Madame Vautrin's inquiries endangered it all. Harrow's face reddened, his ring glinting as he gestured. This is outrageous. I am a respectable merchant, not a conspirator. Holmes ignored him, turning to Dubois. Mademoiselle, your devotion to Madame Vautrin was noted, but Sophie saw you whispering with Lefebvre in the embassy gardens. You knew of his scheme, did you not? Dubois' eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. I loved him. Henri, Monsieur Lefebvre, promised me a future. He said Madame Vautrin was obstructing important work, that she needed to be dissuaded. He gave me the tainted oils, saying they would only make her ill. I didn't know they would kill her. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Lestrade's eyes widened, and Sophie's hands clenched, her grief palpable. Lefebvre's face was ashen, his denials faltering. She lies, he stammered. I never told her to poison anyone. Holmes's voice cut through the tension. You did not need to, monsieur. You provided the means, knowing Leclerc had tainted the oils. Mademoiselle Dubois, blinded by love, applied the perfume, believing it would only sicken her mistress. Her symptoms were real. She inhaled trace amounts, unaware of the poison's strength. But you, Lefebvre, orchestrated the murder to silence Madame Vautrin. Harrow rose, his voice booming. This is absurd. I dealt with Lefebvre on trade matters, nothing more. You have no proof linking me to murder. Holmes produced Sophie's letters, their wax seals matching those from the safe. These, Sir Reginald, name you as the beneficiary of diverted funds. Madame Vautrin's notes confirm she suspected your involvement. Your red stone ring seen by Sophie places you at the embassy, watching to ensure your scheme remained hidden. Lestrade stepped forward, his notebook open. That's enough, Holmes. If what you say is true, we've got a case for murder and conspiracy. Lefebvre, Dubois, you're coming with us. Dubois sobbed, collapsing into her chair while Lefebvre's protests grew feeble. Harrow's face darkened, but he offered no further defense. Sophie approached Holmes, her voice soft. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. My sister's death is avenged, though it brings no comfort. Holmes nodded, his expression somber. Justice is a cold solace, madame, but it is served. As Lestrade led Dubois and Lefebvre away, their wrists bound, Holmes sank into his armchair, relighting his pipe. The room felt emptier, the fire's warmth unable to dispel the chill of the tragedy. A sad affair, Watson, he said, his voice low. Dubois' loyalty to Lefebvre blinded her to his treachery, and Madame Vautrin paid the price. A lesson, perhaps, in the dangers of devotion unchecked by reason. I nodded, my thoughts heavy. And Harrow? Will he face justice? Holmes exhaled a curl of smoke. His wealth may shield him, but the letters will expose his role. The embassy will not protect him forever. For now, we have done what we can. The fog outside had begun to lift, revealing the faint outline of Baker Street. I looked at Holmes, his face weary but resolute, and felt a surge of admiration for his unyielding logic. You saw through the shadows, Holmes, I said. The perfume, the letters, Dubois' tears, all led to the truth. He smiled faintly, his pipe glowing in the firelight. The truth, Watson, is a light that pierces even the thickest fog, but it often reveals more sorrow than we expect.